I'm Jhon, and welcome back to Plane Crashed, where we uncover the most haunting mysteries in aviation history. Imagine this: a plane vanishes without a trace, no signal, no wreckage, no goodbye. Families wait for answers that never come. Investigators chase shadows across oceans, and the world forgets. Until years later, the silence is broken. What once was lost suddenly resurfaces, buried deep in jungles, frozen in glaciers, or hidden beneath the sea. These are not just stories of disappearance. They're echoes from the sky, finally returning to tell their truth. Today, we explore the chilling cases of planes found years after they vanished. The year was 1947, a time when the golden age of aviation was still young and the sky was a frontier of wonder and danger. British South American Airways was one of those pioneering carriers, flying long routes across continents and mountain ranges that few dared to cross. On August 2nd, one of their aircraft, an Avro Lancastrian named Stardust, prepared for its routine flight from Buenos Aires, Argentina, to Santiago, Chile. It was a powerful four-engine plane derived from a wartime bomber, sleek and trusted, with a reputation for reliability. The crew of 6 was experienced, led by Captain Reginald Cook, a veteran of World War II, along with his co-pilot, First Officer Norman Hilton Cook, and radio operator Dennis Harmer. Among the passengers was a diplomat, a businessman, and a woman returning home to Chile. The weather forecast was rough but not impossible. They had flown in worse. At 1:46 p.m. local time, Stardust lifted off from Buenos Aires airport and climbed into the clear Argentine sky, its engines roaring across the pampas as it set its course westward toward the towering Andes Mountains. The flight would normally take around 4 hours, passing over the snow-capped peaks before descending into Santiago. Radio communication was steady throughout most of the journey, and everything seemed perfectly normal. Then, as the aircraft approached the mountains, the weather began to deteriorate rapidly. Strong headwinds, turbulence, and thick clouds enveloped the plane, cutting visibility down to almost nothing. Still, the crew maintained contact with air traffic control, calm and professional. At 5:41 p.m., as the flight neared its expected arrival time, the radio operator sent a message in Morse code to the Santiago Control Tower, ETA Santiago 1745. It was routine, standard, expected. Then came another message, one that would become one of the greatest aviation mysteries of the 20th century. It was a single word: Stendeck. The operator at Santiago Tower, puzzled, asked Stardust to repeat the message. The reply came instantly: Stendeck. The tower, thinking it was a mistake, requested clarification. Once more, the radio operator transmitted Stendeck. Then silence. Stardust never arrived in Santiago. There was no distress call, no indication of trouble, no radar back then to track it. The plane had simply vanished. Search and rescue operations began immediately, but the Andes are unforgiving. The terrain was steep, icy, and vast, stretching endlessly between Argentina and Chile. Dozens of flights scoured the skies. Ground teams trekked up snow-covered passes, braving avalanches and bitter cold. But there was no trace, not a single scrap of metal, no oil slick, nothing. It was as if Stardust had been swallowed whole by the mountains. Weeks turned into months, and months into years. The families of those on board were left in torment, caught between hope and despair. The mysterious word Stendeck haunted investigators. What did it mean? Was it a code? A distress signal? A sign of sabotage? Aviation experts, linguists, and even cryptographers debated it for decades. Some thought it meant severe turbulence encountered, now descending emergency crash, while others believed it was a scrambled or misheard message caused by faulty transmission. But without wreckage, without answers, all anyone had were theories. As time passed, Stardust faded into legend. It became one of those ghost stories pilots whispered about, a plane that vanished into thin air. The Andes were a graveyard of secrets, and Stardust had become one of them. Then half a century later, in 1998, something extraordinary happened. A group of climbers ascending Mount Tupungato, a 21,555-foot peak on the Argentine-Chilean border, spotted something glinting beneath the ice. At first, they thought it was a piece of rock or maybe a weather station. But as they got closer, they realized it was metal, smooth, riveted metal. They began digging through the ice and snow and unearthed a piece of an engine, a propeller blade twisted but recognizable, bearing the insignia of the Royal Air Force. Soon after, they found other fragments, shreds of clothing, a leather glove, even parts of a wheel still encased in ice. When investigators were alerted, they confirmed the unthinkable. After 51 years, the wreckage of Stardust had been found. The aircraft had crashed high on the glacier, nearly 10,000 feet above sea level, smashing into the mountain at full speed. The violent impact had caused an avalanche that buried the wreck instantly, sealing it in ice for decades. As the glacier slowly melted with time, the mountain began to give up its secret. Teams of forensic experts and mountaineers carefully recovered what remained. Among the wreckage were human remains, pieces of uniforms, shoes, bones perfectly preserved by the cold. The ice had kept everything intact, almost as if time itself had frozen the moment of tragedy. For the families of those lost, it was a bittersweet discovery. After half a century, they finally had answers, but the reality was just as haunting as the mystery. Analysis of flight data and weather patterns suggested that the crew had likely been flying through thick cloud cover, relying entirely on dead reckoning navigation. Without visibility and with strong headwinds, their calculations may have been thrown off, leading them to believe they had cleared the Andes when in fact they were still on the eastern side. Believing they were safely past the mountains, they began descending toward Santiago. But instead, they flew straight into the face of Mount Tupungato at over 300 miles per hour. The crash was instantaneous. No one aboard ever had a chance. As for Stendek, even with the wreck found, the mystery endured. Some believe it was simply a misheard or corrupted transmission of dissent, repeated quickly over poor radio conditions. Others think it was an abbreviation or internal code used by the crew. A few even suggested more eerie explanations, that it was a deliberate cryptic signal or an intentional final message. But in truth, no one will ever know for sure. Stardust had taken its secrets to the mountain, and only fragments of its story returned. What makes this tragedy so haunting isn't just the crash itself. It's the silence that followed, the way nature concealed it so completely that even with modern technology, it took over 50 years to rediscover. Imagine that ice melting slowly, decade after decade, until a piece of metal gleamed in the sunlight, revealing a story frozen in time. The discovery reignited global fascination. Journalists, historians, and scientists flocked to the site. Documentaries and books were written. Families visited the base of Mount Tupungato to pay their respects, some bringing flowers, others simply standing in silence, imagining the final moments of those who had been lost. The crash site, remote and dangerous, became a shrine, a place where mystery and memory met. Stardust is more than an aviation accident. It's a reminder of an era when flying was both a marvel and a gamble, when mountains were unmapped giants and weather could turn friendly skies into fatal traps. It's also a testament to human endurance, to our need to seek closure, no matter how long it takes. The discovery of Stardust taught the world that even when the sky keeps its secrets, time and nature have a way of returning the truth. Decades after its disappearance, pieces of the aircraft still occasionally emerge from the glacier carried down by meltwater. Each fragment another whisper from 1947, for Jhon on plane crashed. The story of Stardust is not just a lost flight, it's a ghostly echo of aviation's past. A plane that disappeared into the heavens, only to reappear generations later. A frozen mystery thawed by time, reminding us that the sky never forget in March of 1948. The skies over Alaska were thick with storm clouds and ice. An endless expanse of wilderness stretching beyond imagination, where mountains pierced the heavens and the cold could silence even the strongest engines. It was here that Northwest Airlines Flight 4422 began its journey into mystery. The aircraft, a Douglas DC-4, had taken off from Anchorage late at night, bound for New York with a planned stop in Minneapolis. On board were 24 passengers and 6 crew members, 30 souls in total. The passengers were a mix of businessmen, oilmen, and soldiers returning home, along with 2 pilots. Captain Robert Lind and First Officer Vern Withy, both seasoned flyers who had seen more than their share of danger during the war. The DC-4, sturdy and reliable, had proven itself countless times as a workhorse of both war and peace. But Alaska was no ordinary airspace. Its skies could shift from calm to catastrophic in seconds, and that night the mountain winds were merciless. Flight 4422 departed into the darkness, its engines roaring as it climbed into freezing air. The crew maintained steady communication for most of the flight. Their last message came as they crossed the rugged interior of Alaska, acknowledging they were cruising normally and expected clear passage. Then, without warning, the radio went silent. No distress call, no static, no trace. The plane had vanished. Search and rescue teams were dispatched. Within hours, combing through flight paths and mountain ranges, but Alaska is a land where 1,000 mountains look the same, and visibility that time of year was near zero. Planes flew grid after grid, scanning the snow below, while ground teams fought freezing temperatures, avalanches, and treacherous slopes. Days turned into weeks, yet not a single piece of wreckage was found. The mountains had swallowed Flight 4422 whole. The official search was called off after a month, and the disappearance became another cold case in Alaska's long history of lost planes. Families of the passengers waited for news that never came. Some clung to the hope that the plane had made a forced landing somewhere remote. Others believed it had exploded mid-air, scattering its remains across the wilderness. But there was no debris, no oil slick, no bodies. It was as if the plane had simply ceased to exist. Over the years, legends grew around Flight 4422. Stories spread that it had been carrying a secret cargo, gold, diamonds, or even classified materials from post-war deals. Some claimed it had been hijacked. Others that it had flown off course into Russia during the height of Cold War paranoia. None of it could be proven, and the Alaskan wilderness kept its secret. Half a century passed, and Flight 4422 became a ghost story, one of those eerie tales pilots told each other while crossing the same icy ranges where it had disappeared. Then in 1999, something remarkable happened. 2 commercial airline pilots and mountaineers, brothers by the names of Brad and Ken McManus, were scaling Mount Sanford, a massive glacier-covered volcano in southeastern Alaska. It was a bright, cold day when something caught their eyes, a strange glint far below the ice field, reflecting the sunlight like polished silver. They descended closer and saw it clearly, a large, curved piece of metal, weathered but unmistakably man-made. Excitement and disbelief filled the air as they chipped away the ice and uncovered what appeared to be part of an aircraft engine, still intact despite decades of crushing pressure. Scattered nearby were shards of aluminum, pieces of wiring, and something more haunting, shreds of human clothing and bone fragments. They contacted authorities, and soon investigators confirmed what many thought would never be possible. The wreckage belonged to Northwest Airlines Flight 4422. After 51 years entombed in the ice, the missing plane had finally been found. The crash site sat high on Mount Sanford at an elevation of over 11,000 feet. Analysis revealed that the DC-4 had likely flown directly into the mountain in the dead of night, its crew unaware of the danger until the very last second. The impact was catastrophic. The plane struck the glacier at full speed, disintegrating instantly and igniting a massive fire. The intense heat melted the snow and caused an avalanche, burying the entire wreck under hundreds of feet of ice. The crash had been so violent that it vaporized much of the aircraft, leaving only scattered fragments that over the years were carried slowly down the glacier. The discovery was both miraculous and tragic. For the families, it brought long-awaited closure, but it also reopened wounds that had never fully healed. Forensic teams arrived at the site, carefully excavating what the glacier had preserved. They found charred pieces of metal, melted glass, and human remains so well preserved by the ice that fingerprints could still be taken. 2 bodies were identified using DNA, crew members who had sat in the cockpit when the plane went down. Investigators determined that weather was the likely cause. That night in 1948, a fierce snowstorm had blanketed the region, and with limited navigation equipment, the pilots likely misjudged their altitude and position. Flying blind through the dark, they had descended too early, thinking they were clear of the mountains when they were in fact heading straight toward one of the tallest peaks in Alaska. There was no time to react. The crash was instantaneous. The story could have ended there, a simple tragedy explained by weather and navigation error. But Flight 4422 carried an added layer of intrigue. Among its cargo was rumored to be a shipment of jewels and furs, possibly worth millions in modern currency. For decades, treasure hunters had speculated that the wreck contained valuables lost forever under the ice. When word of the discovery broke, teams of explorers and fortune seekers made their way toward Mount Sanford, hoping to recover what the glacier might still hold. However, authorities quickly restricted access to the area, declaring it both a hazardous zone and a memorial site. Despite that, bits of debris continued to surface every summer as the glacier melted, drawing renewed fascination each time. The mountain, silent for so long, had begun to reveal its frozen secret piece by piece. What made the case of Flight 4422 so eerie was the way nature had preserved it. For 50 years, the plane had been trapped in a perfect state of suspension, its story locked in ice while the world moved on. The glacier had acted like a time capsule, holding within it the moment of impact, the fire, the final screams of engines dying against rock. When it emerged, it was as if the mountain had exhaled, returning the dead to the world of the living. The rediscovery also sparked scientific interest. Glaciologists studied how the plane had moved within the ice, finding that over the decades, the wreck had shifted several miles from the impact site, carried slowly downward like a fossil in motion. The remains of the crew were brought home, laid to rest with honors, while personal effects recovered from the site, a watch, a ring, a pilot's logbook, were given to surviving relatives. The logbook, still legible, ended abruptly mid-entry, the ink frozen on a half-finished word, a haunting reminder of how quickly fate can intervene. As the story of Flight 4422 spread, it became more than just a crash report. It became a tale of endurance, of time, and of the way nature conceals and reveals history. The Alaskan wilderness, vast and indifferent, had guarded the wreck for half a century before melting ice finally exposed it. And with climate change accelerating, more wrecks like Flight 4422 are slowly beginning to reappear across the world's glaciers. Airplanes once thought lost forever now resurfacing. Ghosts of the sky thawing out after decades of silence. For Jhon on Plane Crashed, this story isn't just about a plane crash, it's about the patience of the earth, the fragility of flight, and the strange justice of time. Flight 4422 was gone for 51 years, but it was never truly lost. It was waiting encased in ice for the moment when the world was ready to remember. The men and women aboard that flight took off into a night they never escaped. Yet through their rediscovery, their story continues to fly, carried on the cold winds of Alaska's mountains. The glacier had hidden their truth, but when the sun finally touched it again, the past returned to life, shimmering like the metal beneath the snow, reminding us that the sky forgets nothing as the glacier continues to melt, and the last fragments of Flight 4422 slowly emerge from their icy tomb. The story stands as a haunting reminder that the sky never truly forgets. For half a century, the frozen silence of Mount Sanford guarded the final moments of 30 souls, their voices preserved in snow and steel until time itself chose to reveal them. What was once a mystery whispered among pilots has become a testament to human endurance, the power of nature, and the passage of time. The mountain kept its secret, but in the end, it gave it back, not as tragedy alone, but as history reborn. And as the sun sets over the Alaskan peaks, the ghost of Flight 4422 finally comes to rest, its journey complete, its story no longer lost to the cold.